This has been the weirdest night I've ever had on Facebook or otherwise. Um, and that is actually saying something. um,
I think it's because I'm here and honestly, I've whenever we do any kind of broadcast or Zoom or anything like that, we constantly have technical issues if we're actually in the museum. Very rarely if we're other places.
okay.
So who knows? Maybe it's just the nature of the place.
Okay. So I'm gonna go to Instagram Live as well. I'm now live. All right, yay. So this has been the strangest technical situation I think I've ever encountered, and that's saying something. But that aside, hi everyone, I'm Tracy Stein. Welcome to my first ever technology difficulty laden episode of Unpacking Possibility with Dr. Tracy Stein. As I mentioned in my little promo, I have been away doing very mysterious and spooky things, but now I'm back. I am so happy that for my first ever live interview, podcast interview, where I'm doing the interviewing, my guest is somebody I know that you will love as much as I do. And her name is Kathy Kelly. Kathy is many things, but she is most well known probably for being the creator and proprietress at Paranormal Books and Curiosities and the Paranormal Museum in Asbury Park, New Jersey. So we're going to talk about all kinds of paranormal things. And we'll start, as always, with hearing from Kathy herself about her journey, because as one might imagine, she did not grow up in a paranormalist family per se, but she listened to her inner wisdom and decided she really needed to follow this very unusual but incredibly interesting calling. So, Kathy, without further ado, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And thanks for thinking of me. I'm excited to be here and to talk to you and to talk to your listeners and viewers. Um, you know, I a lot of people ask me how I ended up being interested in, well, a lot of people ask me how I ended up actually being kind of a professional paranormalist. And it was not how I started out. It certainly wasn't the career. Certainly wasn't the career that I intended to have. Although, you know, those questions that people ask and they said, you know, if you could tell your 12-year-old self, you know, if you look back to your 12-year-old self, would they be surprised at what you're doing? You know, and I think my 12-year-old self would be like, yes, you know, very excited and happy that I kind of ended up doing the weird stuff that I always envisioned myself doing. I started out, I was a lit major in college, which was really, really telling and really, really enjoyable, but not a really big commodity when it came to the job market. You know, when I was leaving college, I ended up working in television for about 18 years in kind of niche marketing and sports marketing, which really got me interested. And it got me interested in the creation of different types of markets, but it also got me very comfortable in the idea of doing something a little bit outside the norm and still being able to make a living doing it. And then about 15 years ago, I had reached kind of I'd reached the ceiling of what I was going to be able to do in that career. And while I still loved what I did, I realized it just wasn't as fulfilling as I had hoped it would be. And a friend of mine said, you know, whatever it is that you end up doing, you need to do something with the paranormal. And
As
the
one
reason was,
does.
yeah, of course, because I was that person. You know, I was that person, like when I was 16, 17 years old, I was the one with the Ouija board, and I was the one that knew all the obscure stories, and I went to graveyards, and I just, you know, if I read Edgar Allan Poe, I just was that person, and the interest was always there, and it was an abiding interest. It wasn't something that ebbed and flowed. It was always kind of there for me on lots of different levels and in lots of different subjects. And I went through kind of the whole spectrum of paranormal interests, from like UFOs to fringe societies to Rosicrucian to, you know, all of this stuff. But for me, the real passion that I had was pushing back the boundaries of this world for me, and honestly pushing back the limits of the world for me. And so I always had that passion for it. I always had a passion for history, and the way I looked at history was through these things, because I was always interested in personal history versus big moment histories. And I found that that really went hand in hand with paranormal studies. And this friend of mine said, whatever you do, you have to do this. And I thought, I was at a real crossroads in my life, and I thought, okay, but what does that mean? You know, what do you mean do paranormal? And she was like, I don't know, but that's what you have to do. And I started out small. I started out by, I'll write a book, or I'll do this, or I'll do that. And then I just decided to do everything. And I said, you know, the hell with it. There's got to be people out there like me who have more than a casual interest in this, and less than a obsession. You know what I mean? Somewhere right in the middle. And I took my background in television, and I looked at the ratings on, this would have been around 2006, 2007. I looked at the ratings on television, and the number one TV shows, the greatest number of television shows that were being produced in 2006, 2007 were paranormal shows. And there was more paranormal programming than there was, the only thing that there was more of was Major League Baseball. And
it's amazing. I think we lost Kathy for a second, but she will be back. We've had the most incredibly unusual night, honestly, technology-wise, and Kathy will be able to tell you a little bit about what goes on at Paranormal Tower, which is actually where she is now. She was home, and she thought, oh, I'm just going to come in and I'll get better reception, ironically, at the museum. And honestly, I'm telling you right now, as a person who has had paranormal and transpersonal experiences my entire life, I would not spend 10 minutes alone in the museum. No offense, Kathy, it's an incredible place, but with all the various artifacts there and all of the things that have actually happened on camera at the museum, weird noises, actual voices, things moving, and again, on camera, in the middle of the night when no one's present.
I can't believe this. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just saying, I can't believe, but I can, because I think that where you are right now is one of the most paranormally charged places, no exaggeration. And it's actually, I wonder if like the spirits are messing with us.
Well, I have to say, it is funny because we do have so many artifacts here. And I do think that they do tend to regardless of whether or not it's spirits or whatever, I think that there is energy here that does interact. And I apologize for that. But to
never
just
apologize.
Get to the to the crux of it. I just decided to do everything. And we originally started with Paranormal Books and Curiosities, which actually is where I met you, Trace.
Yeah. A while ago now.
Yeah, 15 years ago. And I had a collection of artifacts, and people were always donating artifacts. It was like, I have something terrifying here. What do I do with it? And I was always like, drop it off, you know? And so I ended up with hundreds and hundreds of artifacts. Now probably more than 1,000 artifacts that have varying levels of hauntings or energy attached to them. And ultimately, I opened the Paranormal Museum to share those things. And the Paranormal Museum became, I think, a larger statement or something that's much more attractive to people than just the shop. And the shop was always very successful. but the museum is a little bit, I think the museum has a kind of a national cachet now.
Oh yeah. I'm laughing as you're describing the artifacts, which is what I was talking a little tiny bit about when you kind of lost the connection. You hear the Asbury Park John Zaffis, which,
Yeah,
like, and paranormalists will know who that is. Some people
right.
won't, but
I like to say John Zaffis is the Connecticut Kathy Kelly. I'm only kidding. I'm only teasing. I actually do have something from their collection here, though. I do have I have an Ed Warren original painting here, which I'm sure John is sad to have let go of. But let's just say, you know, a little rivalry is good.
So just for people who may not be as plugged into the paranormal, I know like your fans are absolutely plugged into the paranormal. Most of mine probably are less plugged in, even though that's been a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember, kind of more secretly for most of it. But talk, you know, you have something from Ed and Lorraine Warren. John Zaffis is related to Lorraine. Is that?
Yeah, John Zaffis, I think, is a son-in-law or not, or a nephew. Yeah, nephew, I think.
So, but Ed and Lorraine were very, very famous. And I believe Lorraine,
they would consider themselves demonologists, right? So the way the public would know Ed and Lorraine Warren right now is through the Conjuring movies.
Yes.
And they have been really romanticized in those movies. You know, depending on, I would say that they are kind of like old lions of paranormal. And if you're a person who's very interested in the paranormal, you're going to know who they are. The vast majority of people laud them. The vast majority of people consider them like, you know, icons. Not all of us feel the same way. However, I have always approached the paranormal from a historical perspective. So I look at their input not as to the value of it, but the importance of it. And Ed and Lorraine Warren were incredibly important figures in the paranormal field up until she passed away 3 years ago, I think now. I think she died in 2019, 2019. Ed died in 2005. They are most famous for the Amityville case, right, even though people now know them from the Conjuring movies. And Patrick Wilson has been cast as Ed Warren, which was a very, very complimentary casting. You know, I'm just gonna say, although the woman who plays Lorraine looks a lot like her. She really truly does look like her. So they were very famous because of their involvement with the Amityville case. They're I would say in their history, they were very controversial. I think because Lorraine Warren lived to be 94 years old, she became kind of this like charming older woman. And people forget that she was 35 at some point and decidedly less charming. But they're very, very important figures in that they did, you know, like Hans Holzer, like even J.B. Rhine and people like that, but like Hans Holzer and the Warrens really took the idea of the paranormal. They would have called it ghost hunting. They would have called it demonology, into the kind of mainstream and started the entertainment side of it, right? Or the infotainment side of it, as Holzer would have said.
Okay.
And so I think they were important in that way. Like they did take their show on the road. They also did attempt to do some kind of forensic studies. Like they used technology as a methodology for studying the paranormal. I don't know that you would call it, you know, science, but it certainly was a step in the direction of that. And so they were really important figures. And so I have more than one piece from them, but I love the idea that I have a painting of Ed Warren's because it was how they got into houses in the beginning. When he would find a place that he thought was haunted, he would paint it, and then he would essentially sell the product, sell the painting to the homeowner as a way of getting into the house to then investigate it. So it was, and
No
I think
idea. That's the
$3 or $4.
historian in
That's
you.
how he made his living. They were both very devout, so you're talking about in the late 50s, early 60s, very much a different world. But to me, it's literally having a piece of paranormal history.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. And again, it ties back as we go back to kind of your story. You're actually a historian. You have a
Oh yeah.
master's degree in history, and
Right.
this has been a lifelong passion. And it's so interesting because I was going to make a joke, about how, again, like your family weren't like big paranormalists, that it was like this was a
No,
natural path.
they still aren't. They still aren't. There's still a whole, what does she do again? Fortunately, I have 7 brothers and sisters, so I kind of get lost in the shuffle. I actually went back and got my master's degree in history to legitimize, or there was always a knock on this subject matter as if it was unworthy of study. And so I went back to get my degree so that those people who would kind of inherently just dismiss the subject matter would have to pause and say, well, she does have a master's degree in history, so she has done the work,
Right.
to kind of, and it's been very effective. I also did it because I have a passion for history as well. And like I said, this was always a way for me to interpret history. But also, I just don't think it's fair for people to just dismiss other people's interests out of hand, as if there's like an intellectual elitism that if you are interested in this subject matter, you must be somehow be intellectually deficient, or not or the more educated you are, the less interested in this you are. And I absolutely disagree. I think the more educated you are, if it's a true passion for you, it's going to become more interesting. There are casual people who are interested in the paranormal, people who love ghost hunting, people who love horror movies. And then there are people who look at this a little bit differently, or a little bit, look at this with more intensity, and go into a more spiritual aspect of it. And then you have people like the Rhines, JB Rhine and Dr. Sally Feather, who look at this and say, we can empirically prove this if we choose to. And he coined the phrase ESP. I think they did over 2 million repeated tests to prove the statistical to statistically prove that ESP exists, and he did it. He did prove that. And those tests were used by the federal government to support other, studies. So I didn't like the idea that someone's interest or someone's passion or someone's focus could be dismissed out of hand. And so because I thought that was really arrogant. And so when I built Paranormal, I built it for those people that maybe didn't have the wherewithal to go and get a master's degree and prove, I wanted to build a place where people who are interested in the subject matter could pursue it and do that proudly. And I'm super proud of the product that we've, of what we present here and how we present it.
Oh yeah.
And I love Halloween, so.
Yeah. But you're one of the best storytellers I think I've ever met. And you actually do that professionally. The Asbury Park Ghosts and Legends tour has been massively successful for years and years. I think that's probably how we met, again, probably 14, 15 years ago. And what you were saying a moment ago about this kind of bias that, oh, well, only the simple-minded actually believe in this stuff. I mean, you know, I'm an educated woman. I've had transpersonal, when I think of transpersonal, I think, you know, beyond the self, but usually I'm thinking kind of feeling good experiences, but I've had very paranormal experiences ever since I was very young. And on the one hand, I'm fascinated. I remember being extremely frightened. But it's something that calls to me again and again.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are actually a lot of highly educated people who are very interested in understanding psi and understanding paranormal phenomena and understanding life after death. And I know it's a very broad umbrella.
Right. But you're also using words that are, because you're a person that's able to articulate what you're saying using a vocabulary that's elevated from, you know, like, did you hear that? Or, you know, I think it's a demon. And so it's not just the belief in the paranormal, it's the interpretation of what the paranormal means, right? So, and I think that's where sometimes people get tripped up, right? So if you have an experience, the vast majority of paranormal experiences are non-visual and they're personal in nature, right? So it's something that's related specifically to you. You know, it's not Belial, it's not, you know, it's not some major Hollywood type haunting. It's something very subtle. And it's something that makes you go, I just can't explain that. I cannot explain that using common, you know, a common kind of explanation. And because you're able to articulate that, and because you're able to say, I'm interested in psi, there's a big difference between saying I'm interested in understanding the existence of psi and saying, I think I saw a demon, right? But it's
Yeah.
just semantics, right? I mean, it's semantics and interpretation, because your education has allowed you to kind of dispense with a certain lower level of understanding and kind of jump over that, right? Which is not to say, I'm not saying there aren't demons. I'm not saying that I personally don't think that there are. That doesn't mean that there aren't grumpy spirits, you know, or, you know, jerks, you know, for lack of a better word. But
Discarnate jerks.
yeah, just yeah, exactly, disembodied jerks. But the fact that I think being able to articulate it and being able to say, hold the phone for a second, you can't dismiss what I'm experiencing out of hand. Simply, you cannot say that this cannot be, because it cannot be, right? There has to be, you know, I remember a person came in here, and listen, I get tons of skeptics and they all love to challenge me. And I love that. That's great. I'm a skeptic. I love being challenged.
And I am
How
as
else do I
well.
learn? You know, how else do I learn? And you know that I'm not dogmatic in my approach at all. I want you to show me more. Show me more. And I had a young man come in here, and he was asking me about seances, and he was asking me about ghost hunts, and he said, isn't this like you're just taking something small that happened and blowing it out of proportion, like making it into a big deal? And I said, okay, that's one way to look at, you know, you take something small that happened and you make it a big deal. And I said, but aren't you taking something small that happened and pretending it didn't? Right? So just because
That's a good point.
just because the activity is small doesn't mean it didn't happen. You know, we have this tendency to want these big Hollywood moments, but those are not the moments that people experience. And when people come in and talk to me, and Tracy, you know this, thousands of people have come in and talked to me about their person. And sometimes they interpret them as negativity. Sometimes they interpret them as demons. Sometimes they interpret them as angels. And it's always through some kind of prism that they have. And they say, I'm going to interpret it through this belief system that I have, or this knowledge base that I have. But they're having these experiences. Lloyd Auerbach, another great, not ready for television probably, but a truly great paranormalist who wrote a great book. ESP Parapsychology, and I can't remember the rest of it. It's out of print right now, but if you get a chance, get it. It's a great book. And Lloyd has put his time in and has worked really, really hard.
Super smart.
Super smart guy, college professor, you know, teaches out in California. He actually said, you know, he said ghosts exist. That is not open to debate. Ghosts have been empirically proven to exist. What they are is what we continue to debate. And that's the truth. Like, people are having these experiences. So if they're having these experiences, are they psychosomatic? Are they, you know, are they hallucinations? Is it the survival of personality? Those are all of the options that you have. And that's where we're having the argument. Whether people are having the experience or not is not open to debate. They are. You know, what they are is what we're still figuring out. And it's probably different in every case.
I'm glad that you brought up that small things, because they are so personal, can be, in fact, among the most impactful.
Right.
And I'm going to share something about when we went to a seance at Paranormal, where you,
Right.
Kathy, were, you know, you have hired people to come in and do these things, people who are professional psychics and mediums, and yet you do them sometimes too.
Right.
And you're, you know, it's funny. So this is a quick anecdote, but years ago, my aunt and uncle and my cousins were visiting, and my cousin Nick, who's quite a bit younger than I am, was super interested in the paranormal, couldn't wait to come to the bookstore, and you happen to be having a seance. He and I went. I don't remember if Jay went. You know, and I was kind of like, you know, like I just, even though I've had a zillion paranormal experiences myself, every single time I'm always in this place of, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? And
Right.
it's that kind of perennial skepticism, which I think some people would be surprised to hear. But, you know, I'm sitting there and I'm hearing these messages come through for other people, and you could see how profoundly moved.
Right.
But you started talking to us, and you came through, and I can't remember if you came through with my grandmother's name, which was not a common name and not one that you would have known. And, you know, because my cousin Nick is so much younger and I hadn't seen him in a long time, I didn't know what was going on in his daily life. And my grandmother, I actually believe she came through you and said these incredibly specific things about Nick's job hunt, these 2 offers he was going to get. None of this made any sense to me at the time. And people could say, okay, it could be a guess, but it was extremely specific. And then there's this detail that almost no one will get that you came up with, or my grandmother came through you with. And most people don't know, but my mother's family is primarily originally from Southern Italy. So when we have an event, there is like no American food there.
I kind of remember this, actually.
Yes. So, you know, I'm kind of drifting a little because it's been like almost 2 hours, and and you come through and I'm not really like, is it my grandmother? I don't know. And then it was supposed to pour rain it was like a 90-something% chance of rain. It was going to be this horrible storm. You said, and I hadn't told you, you're supposed to have a family reunion tomorrow, and we never have them. And I said, yes. And you said, it's supposed to rain, but it won't. And it didn't. The entire event was bone dry, contrary to every meteorologist's prediction. And you said, this is so weird. She's showing me a bowl of corn salad. And I was like, it was the weirdest, most specific thing. And I'm thinking, I can count on one hand the times I've even eaten corn salad, and it has never made an appearance at any of these events. It's not what anybody brings or eats at these things.
Right.
Ever. It's a very Mediterranean, non-corny.
I don't even know what a corn salad is. You know what I mean? I just remember.
I don't know if I'd ever had it before then. I mean, this is what's so crazy. It is probably like 10 years ago. And then I told my aunt the next day we were late to this event. She sent a photo. My cousin's wife had brought this gigantic corn salad, and it was clearly predominantly corn. And again, to most people, they'd be like, who doesn't bring corn salad to a summer, reunion? And I'm thinking, not us. And that was so significant. It was, and it wasn't like 15 details. It was like 5, and they were all accurate.
And
And that's what gets people.
you know what I always say to people is, you have an idea of what you think is important, and they have an idea of what they think is important. And people always would joke, especially at seances, because you're right, I do facilitate some of the seances. I haven't in a very long time, but I would from time to time. And the information that would come through was always very, very subtle and or very, very specific, but very, very personal. And people always think that what they want to know is like lottery numbers. That's not what you want to know. And they don't care about money, right? They're trying to prove to you that it's them. And I remember some of my favorite moments in these, we call them seances, but in these groups, were these little things where you just saw it hit somebody, and they had this moment where they just suddenly had comfort. And it's not about, I remember early on being very, very intimidated to do these things because of the responsibility I felt to be respectful of people's loss, and especially of their grief. And to never be cavalier about it, never be like, because honestly, you can do cold readings. Like you said, there are guesses you can make, like Absolutely. if there's a 25-year-old woman in there and she's trying to connect with her mother, her mother died young, you just know. And so you try to, I would always say, if it's something that came to me as a guess, I throw it away, right? If it's so obvious, I throw it away. Only when it's very, very specific or very, very strong would I kind of deliver something. And I remember doing a seance once early on, and I got to tell you, it's the only time this ever happened to me. Somebody negative came through. Somebody came through who was, there was a young woman at the table, and I believe that this person had been her abuser. And this information came through, and I saw the direction that it was going. I was just, in the beginning, I was just happy whenever anything came through, because it was like, oh, it must all be positive, must all be light, it must all be this. And then I started to realize, oh, wait a second, I don't like this energy. I don't like what this person is telling me. And I don't like how it's how it's affecting this young woman. And I remember that being a turning point for me, where I was like, first of all, it became a moment of belief for me, right? A moment where I'm like, I would not have made that up. That's not a natural kind of direction I would have gone in, because number one, it certainly wasn't making anyone happy. You know what I mean? It's not a direction that I would have gone in. And it made me realize that you really are dealing with people, and some people are unpleasant. But I also was like, I am not ever going to curate what goes through. I'm not the gatekeeper of information. If it comes through, I'm obligated to tell you. But what I was able to do with that right around that time was I finally started, if something was coming through that was very uncomfortable for me, I wouldn't share it with the group. I would pull that person aside and share it with them privately. And what started to happen was, well, you've been to a couple of the seances. It became a really intimate thing. And it became really, you didn't actually, people were just like, I don't even care if I get a message. It's so uplifting, and so kind of, it's still wonderful to watch other people get messages. And I became really, really grateful to be able to do that. But I will say this, it exhausted me. It made me, I would stress about it because I felt an enormous amount of responsibility, but also just physically, it took a big toll on me.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not a person that did this. It's not like I didn't go to training for it. It just kind of spontaneously started to happen. And it's not how I wanted to be seen, right? I wanted to be kind of the observer versus, the person that did it. But I'm glad that I did it, because it opened up my mind as well. It didn't answer any questions. It gave me more questions, but it definitely opened up new avenues for me to kind of invest myself in. And you and I have had those conversations, like, where does this information come from? And, you start getting into like Blavatsky and the Akashic record and all of those things. But it was, I do remember the corn salad though. I do. I remember that time.
Weird thing. Kathy, I want to ask you, because we are in Halloween week, and I know a lot of people like me like the kind of scary anecdotes. Do you have something like that you're like, ooh, like if I think about that, my hair still stands up? And
that happened to me personally.
That happened to you personally, or that you witnessed in any of your investigations, or when you looked at the video in the museum, or what? But something where you were like, oh.
I do have to say, we did have one video here, and it's on my Instagram account, and I can send it to you so you can share it with your viewers as well. About 3 years ago, there are cameras all over the museum, and it's not because I'm afraid anyone's going to steal a book. It's
honestly, I feel bad for them if they actually make that mistake, given all the stuff you have there. I would
I mean, I do have a couple of I do have a couple of things that I that are pretty legit. But I got an update. The cameras always record in 9-second increments, right? And they record at 32 frames per second, right? So actually, I think I had it at 16 frames per second. So 9 seconds, 16 frames per second. So do the math. It's roughly 1,300 frames or whatever. And I got this update, and this is probably going back about 3 years. I got this update that the camera had seen a person. And it sent me this clip, and I looked at it, and I'm like, there's no person there. It must have been like a glitch in the camera or something like that. But I decided to go through it kind of frame by frame. And in 2 frames out of the 1,200 some odd frames that there is a definite human figure leaning against the wall. And I'm pointing over here because that's where it was at. And it absolutely, there's no denying it. It's a human being. So there's no way a human being could get in and get out, but it's a shadow, right? It's only a dark shadow. And I don't know that I feel like it's aggressive or assertive or anything like that, but it's so defined. It's so defined that the camera captured it. And it was one of the few technological things that we've captured where I thought that's very difficult to explain away. It would be extremely difficult. Someone would have to say, she's lying, drunk, or stupid. You know what I mean? Like there's one of those. But to talk about like the scariest thing that happened here in June of 2020.
And sorry, before you tell the story, I want people to know that you have, as you've mentioned, a massive collection of things, objects, dolls, furniture that people have sent you or that you have purchased because it's reportedly quite haunted.
Every single thing, and you can feel it. Every single thing that you can see on the screen now, which I realize is not that much, has a reputation for being haunted, has come to us because of that. Nothing scares me. You know this, Tracy. Nothing scares. I don't get scared. And yet, in June of 2020, COVID is kind of rampant. We closed down. We were closed for almost a full year. I am here in the building because the security cameras kept going off and my Wi-Fi wasn't working properly. So I came in, it was COVID, so night and day didn't have any meaning. So I would come in around 2 or 3 in the morning because I knew there wouldn't be any people around. So I wouldn't have to interact with anybody. And so I was on the phone with Verizon trying to figure out what was going on with my broadband. And I had been somebody had called me up the week before and said, I have this doll. My friend has this doll and she is pretty sure it's cursed and she doesn't want it around. And this person was not the typical person that would say that. And I don't even know what that means, but it's not the person that you would think would be intimidated by something like this. And unfortunately, her husband had passed away of COVID, and she felt that this doll had contributed to that.
Oh my God.
And the reason was that the February prior to COVID, the doll had come into their house. They didn't like it. They didn't like the vibe from it, and they threw it out. And after he passed away, she found it in the basement again. And she did not, she was adamant that he would not have brought it back in. He didn't like it. He was the one that wanted to get rid of it. And so, it's actually right here. It's behind me. I forgot. I'm talking about it. It's right behind me.
It's not the one looking at me.
No, it's not.
Sorry.
It's not. No, not yet. It's on the wall. And so she brought it to me. It was one of the few times I had interaction with people that year. And I actually went and picked it up because I just felt like this family had been through so much. And if I could do something that would make them feel better, I would do it. So I had kind of rushed up, double masked, rolled down the window. She kind of threw it into the car, and, off I went. And I remember looking at it and just really being like, oh, wow, I don't like this doll. Like, there's something about it really did make me uncomfortable.
Naturally, you would take it.
But I don't usually feel that way. You know what I mean? Usually I'm kind of dismissive of it. So I brought it down into the basement. In the basement, I have something that we call the isolation chamber, which is essentially where we bring new artifacts. And we try to separate them from energy sources so that if they're residual in nature, that will dissipate. If they're not, it won't, right? It also just sounds cool, right? So I bring it down, I put it in there. And I left it's a trap door to the basement. So I left the trap door open and the lights were on. And now it's a couple of days later, and I am having tons of problems with cameras, tons of problems with all of our electronics and everything like that. So I come in, and I don't associate one with the other, right? But it did happen when I brought him in. So I'm on the phone, and I'm trying to work through these issues with a young man who works for Verizon. And the trap door is open. None of the other lights are on in the place. And I hear like that. And it sounds like something has stepped out and is moving. It's coming from the basement, and it sounds like they're on the step. So I look over, and I'm like, So I go back to work, and I hear boom, boom, and it sounds like it's taken another step up. So I start to get a little bit intimidated, right? So, and that's very unusual for me, and it makes me really mad. So I'm like, I'm not leaving because of this thing. Whatever this is, it's got to be. It's my interpretation. I'm overthinking it. And then I heard 3 steps, and it sounded like it was right at the top of the stairs. And I just went, I'm out. I got up, and my car was parked by the back door. And our building fronts on both Madison Avenue and Cookman Avenue, right? So my car is parked on Madison Avenue. I left on Cookman and walked a full city block around to get to my car rather than past the steps that this thing was on. Now, was it my imagination? I don't know.
No.
All I know is that I thought retreat was the better part of valor that night, and I left. A week later, I'm up here, and we have something called a portal, which is
of course,
it's a piece of technology that's supposed to allow you to communicate with people who've passed over. It's very similar. It's similar to Spirit Com and a Spirit Box, and it's a huge grain of salt. Take it with a huge teaspoon of salt. But I'm up here, and we're using it, and I say, hey, is there anything that we need to be worried about? And it said evil. And I thought, okay, great, cool. Where's the evil? In the basement. Right now, I don't think this was another spirit warning me about this thing in the basement. I think this was the thing in the basement laughing at me, thinking putting it in the basement does anything. It kind of like, you think we care about we're in the basement or not. It's the only time though that something in this building has pushed me out of my own space. And I was extremely uncomfortable. I was extremely uncomfortable.
But you came back.
I not only came back, but he's right there behind me. He's actually right behind me on the wall. There
Playing
are
with
things that I
knives.
do not put on display. There are things that I do not put on display. This is something I question whether or not to put on display, and I monitor it very closely, because if I felt intimidated by it and I believed that there was activity around it, then I think people who are a little bit more likely to believe and a little bit more likely to invest themselves in that belief might be a little bit at risk. I don't feel that way. You know, I obviously I don't feel that way. But there are artifacts that I do not put on display, and some of them are I don't think they have activity. I just think people would respond poorly to them, like
I
Dybbuk
don't even know
boxes and Ouija
where to
boards.
go with that. I don't even know. I don't even know if I want to ask.
Well, people, you know, people instill, people have belief systems that um that are powerful, and
Oh, most
they have
definitely.
powerful beliefs, you know. And like I always say, Tracy, you know me, I would change a baby on a Ouija board. I would eat dinner. You know, Ouija boards don't scare me. But I also believe that if they scare you, you should stay away from them, because I think that they become kind of self-fulfilling.
Can I just say something? Because it is Halloween week, and so I can get away with it. And then anybody who wants to think of me as somebody who doesn't do this can return to that next week. When I was in college, of course, you know, people on my dorm floor, and then people who became my friends, and you know, even after we moved off campus second year, started playing with Ouija board routinely. And I didn't, but I had been in the room sometimes when they were doing it. And I remember two things. One, my grandfather had passed away the year before. I was still incredibly distraught about it. It was one of the most significant losses in my life, and it took me well over a year to like feel somewhat normal. But I remember being in the room and other people doing the Ouija board and saying like, okay, if this is real, you know, and my hands aren't on it and nobody knows the answer to this, you know, what day did my grandfather die? Now, in my mind, I had the wrong date. So I had a day before he actually died. So when it came through with a date that was literally the next day from what I thought, I was like, wow, that's close, but it's not the right day. And then, you know, I called my mother and turns out the board was right, not me. So super creepy. First creepy story. The second one is when we moved off campus, my roommates and I moved off campus to this very charming Victorian, lovely house. You know, that it smelled like old wood smoke, and you know, it just had the old woodwork. And I remember the people upstairs came down and they were playing the Ouija board. I don't think I did. And at some point, like it started saying some creepy stuff. Okay, and I guess that's what always happens, right? But I remember staying there by myself. It was like the summertime. You know, everybody had gone home. And it was me. I had a friend over, and it like, you know, like sometime at midnight or whatever, I'm in my room, which is off the living room, but I like the living room was to one side and I could see across the dining room. It had this bank of, you know, three windows, very pretty kind of old dining room. And my door is kind of open and I'm lying there. Um, and I look up and there's light coming in the windows from the street. And this very tall, solidly black, I'm masculine figure walks slowly. I can almost not talk about it. And
Right.
slowly past the windows. And as it walked past the windows, you could see that it was opaque. It was so
Right.
dark,
Right.
but that it broke the light coming in through the windows. And I wasn't the only person who saw it. And
Right.
I honestly, I actually think that you know somebody invited somebody in and whatever, it doesn't even matter how it got there, but I can tell you, 30 years on, I'm still creeped out by the thought of that.
Well,
And
you asked me what got me started on this, and I would say probably when I was very young, 6, 7, 8 years old, all of this absolutely terrified me. Absolutely terrified me to where I was absolutely debilitated by it. And we had just moved into our house in Glen Ridge, and we moved from Jersey City, and I'd had a really strange experience. And I can't even tell you what it was now, because I don't know if I'm remembering it or I've told myself the story so many times, but I had a very vivid dream, that the house that we moved into, number one, that there were others in there. And I will tell you, pretty much everybody that's lived there will tell you that there's something strange in the attic. But also that that there were graves in the yard. And I'm 6 or 7
is
years
that
old, so
true?
it's not something. No, but there was a graveyard across the street. So I don't know if
Oh,
I put those two things together, but I remember
okay.
being absolutely petrified. And I used to have these incredibly detailed dreams. And so I think I became interested in this subject matter as a defense against the fear that I had about it. And the more I pursued it, the more I understood that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to all of it. Everything operates on some rules of nature, right? And so I have moved out of kind of the spiritual or the religious interpretations of things and into a kind of a more prosaic look at it. But I was terrified, and it's because I was terrified that I pursued it, because I thought, I remember being like so terrified that even into my 20s, I mean, I remember being so terrified that it was debilitating, and that if I didn't figure out a way to understand it and to kind of get control of it, I would live a fearful life. And now you can put me in I can't even tell you how many lunatic asylums I've been to, how many haunted graveyards, I mean, and me, I've traveled the world doing this. I spent time in Transylvania. I've been to lunatic asylums in Prague, and I don't have that fear anymore, because I understand it to be something natural, which is not, listen, lions are natural too, and they scare the hell out of me, but this in a different way. But yeah, and I think what you're describing as far as what you feel uncomfortable is, there is this, it's very uncomfortable to have someone walk into your space that you don't have the authority or the autonomy to essentially be like, stop. But I will say to people, and anyone who's watching, if they do have these uncomfortable experiences in their homes, 99.9% of these things are not negative. They're just kind of there. And so if you do have an experience, one of the best defenses against it is to speak up and say, hey, you're scaring the hell out of me.
Stop.
Can you stop? And most times they will. Like if something is intelligent and is aware, which is very, very, so extraordinarily rare, it usually is kind of lost in its own, it's usually lost in its own kind of psychosis or its own kind of trauma, and they're not usually there to intimidate or damage you, unless of course you collect the stuff that specifically does that and surround yourself with it.
If it walks back up the stairs, then you should leave.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes a lot of
or if it
ominous
essentially
sounding
says no.
noise. So Kathy, I want to be mindful of your time, but I want to go over a few quick things. One, tell me a place you think is genuinely super haunted. I know you can't limit it to one. And then I want you to talk about your event that is going on right now until Halloween. I mean, through
Right.
Halloween.
Right.
At the Meadowlands, and where people can find out more about that, and where people should go to find out more about you. So first, the genuinely haunted
I'm going to give you two
Very.
places, right? I'm going to give you two places that
More
I
to it,
believe you have a very good opportunity to have a paranormal experience.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you public places because generally speaking, places are not haunted, people are, right? In my experience.
Okay.
But I'm going to give you two places that I absolutely believe have activity, and that I think you could have a very good, a very at
Creepy
least a
good.
very good odds of having pretty good odds of having experience. Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia and the Gettysburg Battlefield. And I
That's
picked
very
those
well
public
known.
places because you will be able to actually go. It's not something you need to go to at night. You don't have to go at night. Ghosts don't appear at night, you know, I mean, only at night. People have experiences at night because space is quiet and because we're more likely to be sitting quietly someplace at night because we work during the day, or we have, you know, busy lives during the day. Gettysburg is extremely active during the day as well because that's when the battles took place. And Eastern State, I think, is amongst the most active places in the country. I'm not picking that over another place like, say, Waverly Hills or something like that. I'm picking it because I know you can go to it, and I think you have a very good chance. Like I've investigated there 33 times, and I would say 6 times we had what I would consider to be very, very strong activity. That's a really high percentage, right? I mean, I've investigated places 15 or 20 times and not had anything happen, you know.
Okay.
And to talk about the event that we're doing, we are working with at the Meadowlands racetrack with an event called Track or Treat, and it is our portion of it is called The Other Side, a Paranormal Experience, and what we're trying to do is present an authentic haunted experience versus a jump scare Halloween experience. So we have 3 or 4 different experiences that you have that are incorporated into the totality of it. We have something called the Spirit Lounge, which we do mediumship, Ouija boards, all different manner of divination and ways of communicating with those who've passed over. We have something called Ghost in the Graveyard, which is this really cute room that we have set up like an old graveyard. And we just do old-fashioned storytelling, ghost stories. I tell them myself. My young charge over here, Sean, tells stories as well. And then we have something called Practical Magic, the ritual room, where we do spell casting. We talk about the power of words. We talk about the power of kind of earth magic and belief and faith and all of those things. And then we have a good old fashioned ghost hunt. And that information is all available at trackortreatnj.com. And you can always find me at paranormalbooksnj.com. On Instagram, we are at the Paranormal Museum, and on Facebook, we are Paranormal New Jersey. And pretty much anytime you connect with anything having to do with us, you're connecting with me. So I'm all over the internet. I'm all over social media, and I'm pretty much the only one doing it. So if you're talking to someone from Paranormal, you're talking to me.
And you are absolutely the best possible person to talk to about this and much more. Kathy, I am so grateful for you making time today. I will put all of that information in the show notes. I'm so sorry for all of the technical issues.
I apologize. I think it was my spirits.
I actually think it's all of your ghosts.
I agree. I'm going to blame them. I'm going to blame Jerry.
I can't, there's no earthly way all of these technical issues could have happened at the same time. But thank you so much. I'm so glad to see you as always. And anyone who comes to see you is in for a real treat.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
So this has been our first live interview on Unpacking Possibility. And if you like the episode, please remember, of course, to share, like, follow, subscribe, and all of that, and check Kathy and paranormalbooksnj.com out as well. And until next time, be well.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.